Good morning. Time to check out some Steve content. Sure, there's some awesome clips of my favorite character in modern gaming. Hello everyone, today we'll be breaking down Steve, the new addition to Smash Bros. A lot of you have been asking me, what do you think about Steve? And I think there are plenty of resources where you can find others' opinions on the character, how strong he is, etc, etc. What I would like to offer you today is a look into what Steve should be doing in various situations. In other words, today we're going to be looking at Steve's game plan. The goal of this video is to give you a basis to build off of. The meta has not been developed enough to go super in-depth, and as such, giving you some of the basic building blocks, no pun intended, is going to be the best way to move forward. That said, there are strong strategies in Smash that work well with the engine, and we can see how Steve abuses these qualities and how they capitalize on these qualities. So to start off with an overview, I think Steve is not a neutral heavy character. I think his disadvantage is great and his advantage is very, very open-ended, and that is where there will be a lot of growth in Steve's metagame. Steve's decision making can be a little bit complicated. He is strongest when he has a good situation set up, but he needs resources to set up those situations. So a lot of times your decision will be between setting up a good situation or mining for resources. Additionally, Steve's lackluster mobility versus huge array of options is an issue that's yet to be decided. Which one will at the end of the day be more impactful to Steve's power level? That said, without further ado, let's talk about Steve's game plan. First, we're going to be talking about the neutral, then advantage, and then disadvantage. Steve's neutral is not very impressive. He doesn't really have an impressive neutral tool like many top tiers, nor does he have the speed to decide what range you're going to be playing at. What he does have, however, is mining and crafting to force the opponent to approach. That said, at the long range, he can mine for materials, and that is going to really help his long range game. It's going to force opponents without projectiles to approach him, which allows him to have a little bit of control over what range is being played at. That said, when the opponent has long range tools, like projectiles, he does tend to struggle a little bit. When his opponent is pelting him with projectiles, he can struggle getting those resources, and as such, he needs to play around his opponent's projectiles at the long range. He can do that either through building a wall and mining behind it, though I personally think these walls are easily destroyed and Steve is quite vulnerable while building them too. The other option is to mine in short bursts while the opponent's projectiles are on cooldown. Overall though, the main reason to play the long range is when your opponent cannot beat you at the long range and then you force them to approach you through your mining. After the opponent approaches you, Steve has to rely on his amazing bait and punish tools. His walling looks strong on the surface, he does have disjoints and great frame data, but the range is lackluster and I don't think it's good enough to keep people out. That said, his whiff punishing is extremely strong. He has some amazing tools between dash attack, grab, and a preemptive minecart. All these tools are great at whiff punishing after a bait, especially minecart empowered by redstone, which can kill extremely early to anyone foolish enough to take the bait. Do keep in mind your minecart requires iron, and as we can discuss later in the video, I don't think it's best to use your iron in the neutral. So yeah, that's a focus on whiff punishing, but there's another aspect of Steve that can help him anti-approach his opponents, and that is his strong shield. He has some amazing out of shield options between his rising sword aerials, his upsmash out of shield, and his parry footstool down air, which can kill extremely early. These tools further accentuate your bait and punish, since when you are baiting your opponent in with movement, a faster opponent might try to overshoot to catch out your movement, in which case this overshoot then gets beaten by you shielding, and then you get an amazing punish out of shield because of how strong his out of shield options are too. On top of that, Steve's grab is actually really strong in his engine. A tether grab in this game can allow you to punish things that are normally unpunishable, like a spaced Crom smash on your shield, stuff like that. I think all these factors combined mean that Steve has a great shield game. Steve's pressure game is a little bit on a weaker side. He has the frame data to really pressure his opponent, but he doesn't really have the grab to do so. On top of that, his lackluster mobility can make it hard to keep up with defensive options, such as a roll or a full hop. He can generally establish his options in close quarters, especially up tilt, However, he has issues getting into that close range, so it's more of a result of circumstances rather than Steve aiming to create close quarter situations. When he is there, he can further mix up his options with the minecart. A dashback minecart will do wonders, or a down air to mix up his timings and lead into big damage or even an early kill. So yeah, I think Steve can pressure the opponent, but it's definitely not something that he aims to do. Overall, I would say neutral is where you set up the rest of your game. You can set up your neutral to mitigate your disadvantage, which gives you another chance to win the neutral, or you can set up your neutral to have an even stronger advantage, all through just mining for iron. You focus on making your opponent approach with your mining and then anti-approach from there, either through bait and punish or using your amazing out of shield game. And if they let you be, mine for days. Steve's advantage is very open-ended and generally reliant on your opponent being offstage. An additional issue of his advantage state is that sometimes you want to be mining during the advantage state, which means you don't have enough time to set up a strong situation. What this means is that Steve's strongest advantage states are often seen towards the end of the stock, where he can knock the opponent back, mine some materials, and set up a strong advantage. Figuring out where to mine or where to set up a strong situation is one of the hardest things about playing Steve, and understanding which option is strongest is going to really separate the great from the good. Steve's lackluster mobility can make his juggling very limited. He's not the greatest at chasing his opponent in the air. However, we talked about his whiff punishing in a neutral before, and he can utilize this strength when juggling as well. He's amazing at covering landings, with punishing landing aerials with the grab, the dash attack, or the minecart, and if the opponent wants to go to a platform, which is the usual answer to getting out of juggles, he can cover that with a triple up air during his short hop or his extremely lasting up smash. On top of that, should the opponent try to land on Steve because they're tired of his whiff punishing, his amazing out of shield game comes through once again. That said, where Steve really shines is when the opponent's off stage. Like we mentioned before, his juggling is a little bit limited due to his mobility, but when the opponent's on the side of the stage, he can use high blocks to wait them out, and that can really allow him to juggle the opponent and force them to go low. When his opponent goes low, his tools really open up. Between down tilt, down air, minecart, and offstage blocks, Steve has a lot of ways to pressure low recoveries. There is no flowchart to deal with all of the recoveries in the game. I recommend you theorycraft the matchup, test things out with your friends, and go from there. Offstage blocks are definitely the most open-ended tool. You can use it to either block off the ledge, as we've seen countless of times before, or as a pseudo peach float to wait your opponent out and then contest them with your hitboxes. One thing I want to warn you about is down to the lower percents. I think it's quite lackluster. At lower percents, a lot of characters can overshoot their recoveries and hit you afterwards, which makes it hard to continually down tilt their recovery. Additionally, oftentimes you can air dodge to ledge after getting hit by a down tilt at these lower percents, and as such, I don't think it's an amazing option here, though keep in mind that it still is an option to rack that damage, reset the situation once, and go from there. Another thing I want to mention is that these low recovery situations are most easily set up with Steve's forward throw, which in turn makes Steve's forward throw that much more rewarding. I think it's an essential part of his punish game because of how much it forces low recoveries and how strong Steve is against these low recoveries. Finally, talking about advantage, there's one little setup that I like to show you during the ledge trap. When the opponent's on the ledge, you build a block, and then from the block you use down tilt, which destroys the block and then cancels your animation. This allows you to cover so many different situations and options. I think it's very strong. Try it out, experiment with it. I think his ledge trap has a lot of potential to keep on growing. Overall, his advantage is very open-ended. I cannot give you a strong game plan for advantage because I think there's so much room to grow, and I think there's so much need for Steve to adapt to the opponent's character in the advantage state. Generally, Steve is strongest when he has a situation set up in his favor, and during the advantage he has all the time in the world to set up whatever situation he wants. Finally, there's disadvantage, and this is what I think pushes Steve to be a good character. Having a good disadvantage does so much for consistency, and Steve definitely is up there with one of the stronger disadvantages in the game. Building blocks is one of the best anti-juggle tools that the game has ever seen. It allows him to shield in the air and counteract so many juggle patterns, it's not even funny. Additionally, Steve gets to mix up his anti-juggle game with down air and minecart, which are both amazing options. However, they both cost iron. This is why we talked about the neutral and how we rather not use iron in the neutral, because of how much it empowers his disadvantage state when he does have iron available. With down air and with minecart, especially multiple of these tools, your disadvantage is arguably the best in the game. And the same goes for offstage. When Steve is offstage, we've talked about this before, his mobility is not the greatest and his up B is much the same. It has pretty good horizontal recovery, however it's very slow at recovering horizontally, and as such, he really needs to have minecart available. If he is offstage without minecart, it might as well be doom. That said, when Steve gets back to the ledge, his options are definitely great. Better than average, better than most, I would say, through his block building. In this clip by Myollnir, you can see how Steve can do a ledge jump into immediate block build to cancel all lag, go straight into his shield, and it just turns ledge jump into the strongest option in the game, arguably. Either way, it's extremely strong, and I think it definitely warrants more exploration. That said, I think the craziest thing about his ledge game is his ledge roll, which is about Peach length. And if you didn't know, guys, Peach has one of the longest ledge rolls in the game. It's amazing, and it really forces you to ledge trap from a different position. When you're ledge trapping further out, it becomes harder to catch jumps, and this is where the jump block trick comes back in. Between these two options, it feels like ledge trapping Steve is almost impossible. Especially since you want to cover the long roll, because when you let Steve back to center stage, he's going to be mining, he's going to be running away, and then anti-approaching you again. It resets the situation. Whereas if he does the jump, he's still in the corner, and Steve in the corner, without iron especially, is pretty weak, though with iron and the minecart, it's really not that big of a deal once again. Overall, I would say Steve's anti-ledge trap is very strong, and his anti-corner game is definitely above average. I'd say put all this together, you have a great advantage state. A little weak in the corner and bad without resources, but with good resource management and good decision making, I think Steve's disadvantage is one of the best in the game. In conclusion, Steve is very iron reliant. He needs iron for his disadvantage to function. On top of that, iron makes his advantage a lot stronger too, with the offstage minecart as well as down air. And finally, it makes his neutral a lot better too. Minecart does a lot for Steve in the neutral. Overall though, I'd say you want to save your iron in neutral and really capitalize on where he is strongest, which is his open-ended advantage. And in turn, I think his neutral is not the greatest. It's mostly a setup for his advantage state. He can frequently return to neutral with a strong disadvantage, which is a strong suit. However, because his neutral, like we mentioned, not the greatest, it's not as amazing as it could be. His neutral especially suffers versus other characters that have dominant neutral tools. I'm talking the Palutenas, the Lucinas, the Shulks, the fast characters with strong disjoints, as well as the zoners, the Duck Hunts, the Megamans, the Villagers, the Samuses. They will all really pass for Steve. However, should he play versus a character that does not have a dominant neutral, he has a field day. He can do whatever he wants, get all of the resources he wants without any stress, and that really pushes him to the next level. His disadvantage is amazing, but his advantage, like we said, super open-ended, and I see a lot of room for growth in terms of metagame when we're talking about Steve's advantage state. One thing I didn't really touch upon in this video is TNT usage. I didn't have a lot of time to play around with it, but right now I do have some clips of Dabuz using TNT in the neutral. I think it has a lot of potential too, to zone people out. Though at the end of the day, you'll be using redstone to set up the TNT. I don't know if that's worth it versus the minecart. I think this is like the first point after this video where you can really start to experiment on your own. How can I use this complicated move? But yeah, that's it. I hope this gives you a starting point for your Steve gameplay. Who do you want to see next? Let me know in my Discord or on my Twitter. Links in the description down below. Check it out, guys. For now, that is going to be all. Stay smart. Boom, boom, into the footstool. Guys, I got my first Steve combo.